Everyone thinks the Krusty Krab is just a burger stand. A crab flips the bill, a sponge cooks the food, customers line up, everyone goes home happy. The man who actually invented it once spent his summers boiling lobsters for real money, long before any of this existed. In this video, we break down how the Krusty Krab actually functions. Section 1. The Origin Story, or Stories. There is a small wooden restaurant sitting at the bottom of the ocean that almost everyone who has ever turned on a television has seen at least once. It sits under a rock formation, past a stretch of open sand, in a town built entirely underwater. People walk in, order a burger, and walk out without giving much thought to how strange that really is. A restaurant, built underwater, selling burgers to fish, run by a crab who loves money more than almost anything else in the world. Before any of that could happen, somebody had to build it. Somebody had to come up with the idea, find the money, and figure out what to sell. That part of the story does not get told very often, and when it does get told, it tends to change depending on who is doing the telling. To understand where the Krusty Krab came from, it helps to step outside the ocean for a moment and look at the man who invented the whole town in the first place. His name was Stephen Hillenburg, and before he ever drew a single fish or wrote a single line of dialogue, he spent his summers working a regular job on land. As a teenager, right after finishing high school, he took a job as a fry cook at a seafood restaurant. Along with cooking, part of his job involved boiling lobsters. He did this for more than one summer, standing behind a hot counter, taking orders, flipping food, and watching the way a small restaurant actually runs from the inside. Years later, when he sat down to build an entire cartoon around sea creatures living ordinary lives, he pulled directly from that memory. The fry cook job became SpongeBob's job. The manager who used to boss him around at that old restaurant became the seed that grew into Mr. Krabs. Hillenburg was not just someone who liked drawing cartoons. He had studied marine biology and had actually taught it before moving into animation, which is part of why the ocean setting in the show never feels random. He knew how sea creatures behaved, how coral reefs looked, and how strange and colorful life under the water can actually be. He took all of that and turned it into a cartoon that looked nothing like a science documentary, but still carried a strange, quiet respect for ocean life underneath all the jokes. When he built the town of Bikini Bottom, he needed a place for his characters to work. A restaurant made the most sense, since a workplace comedy needs a workplace, and food service gave him an easy way to bring different characters together every single day. The show premiered on May 1, 1999, and the very first episode to air was called Help Wanted. That episode introduced the Krusty Krab already open for business, with Mr. Krabs already running it and Squidward already working the counter. SpongeBob walks in looking for a job, and the episode spends its time on him trying to get hired, rather than on how the restaurant came to exist in the first place. This matters because it means the Krusty Krab was never given a proper grand opening on screen. Viewers were dropped into a business that was already up and running, with an owner who already had years of experience, a cash register that already worked, and a menu that already had its famous burger sitting at the center of it. The story of how it all started had to be filled in later, and when the show finally got around to filling it in, the answer turned out to be far stranger than anyone probably expected. The most detailed version of the story showed up years after the show began, in a special episode called Friend or Foe. This episode finally answered a question that had been hanging over the entire series since the beginning, which was how Mr. Krabs and Plankton ever became enemies in the first place. The answer surprised a lot of people, because it turned out the two of them were not always rivals. They started out as friends. As young kids, long before either of them owned a restaurant, Krabs and Plankton spent time together the way regular friends do. There was no hint yet of the bitter rivalry that would define both of their adult lives. Their friendship eventually pushed them toward business. At the time, there was a popular but poorly run restaurant in town called Stinky Burgers. It served food that was not exactly safe to eat, and it kept operating anyway, at least for a while. Eventually, the poor quality caught up with it. One of the regular customers at Stinky Burgers, an older resident known as Old Man Jenkins, ate something there that made him seriously ill, and he ended up dying from it. Word got around fast, health officials stepped in, and Stinky Burgers was shut down for good. With the one major burger place in town suddenly gone, a gap opened up, and two young friends who liked the idea of running their own business saw their chance. Krabs and Plankton decided to build their own burger stand to take Stinky Burger's place. This was not framed as a rescue mission or some noble idea to fix what Stinky Burgers had done wrong. It was simply two friends who saw an opening in the market and wanted to make some money from it. They worked together on a recipe, testing out different combinations, trying to land on something that people would actually want to eat. The problem was that whatever they came up with tasted bad, really bad, the kind of bad that customers notice right away and never forget. Kids who tried their early burgers could not stand the taste, and that reaction started to create tension between the two friends. The tension grew into a full argument. Krabs and Plankton started blaming each other for the bad flavor, each one convinced the other was the reason the recipe was not working. The disagreement escalated until they physically fought over the piece of paper that held their recipe. In the chaos of pulling the paper back and forth, it ripped straight down the middle. Krabs ended up holding the top half, Plankton ended up holding the bottom half, and that bottom half happened to include the line about adding a pinch of chum to the mixture. That single torn piece of paper marks the exact moment their partnership broke apart, and it also explains something that shows up constantly throughout the rest of the series, which is why Plankton's food at the chum bucket always centers around chum, while Krabs' food never does. The split was not just personal. It physically divided the only shared recipe they ever had. After the fight, something happened by accident that changed everything for Krabs. While he was working with what was left of the recipe, a series of ingredients ended up falling into the batter he was mixing. This was not planned. Nobody sat down and carefully measured out a secret ingredient with intention. It happened through an accident in the kitchen, the kind of moment that could have ruined the batch entirely. Instead, whatever combination of ingredients landed in that mixture created something that actually tasted good. Really good. Good enough that Krabs recognized right away he had stumbled onto something valuable. That accidental mixture became the foundation of what would later be called the Krabby Patty, and it gave Krabs the one thing Plankton never had, which was a product people genuinely wanted to eat. With a working recipe finally in hand, Krabs moved forward and opened his own restaurant. Plankton, on the other hand, was left with only half of a torn recipe and a business that never managed to catch on the same way. This is the point where the friendship fully turned into rivalry. Plankton has spent the rest of his life trying to get his hands on the finished formula, the one Krabs built out of that lucky accident, while Krabs has spent that same stretch of time guarding it like it is the single most valuable thing he owns. Neither one of them ever really moved past that day. The entire rivalry that fuels so much of what happens at the Krusty Krab traces back to a torn piece of paper and a batch of batter that got contaminated by mistake. That would be a fairly clean story if it were the only version the show ever gave. It is not. Throughout the years, other episodes have hinted at different versions of how Krabs got his start, and these versions do not always line up neatly with the friend or foe account. Some of these hints are brief, tossed into an episode almost as a passing comment, while others suggest an entirely separate chain of events leading to the restaurant opening. Taken together, the show has given at least a few different explanations across its run for how exactly the Krusty Krab came to exist, and these explanations do not always agree with each other on the details. This kind of inconsistency might look like a mistake at first glance, but it fits naturally with who Mr. Krabs is as a character. He has never been someone who freely shares information about himself, especially information connected to money or to the secret formula that keeps his restaurant successful. He hides his most important documents, keeps his finances close to his chest, and treats his own life story with the same secrecy he treats his cash register. A crab that guarded and that careful about revealing details was never going to leave behind one clean, simple origin story anyway. Whether the different versions were intentional writing choices or simply the natural result of a long-running show revisiting the same idea more than once, they end up matching the personality of the character at the center of the story. Krabs is someone who reveals only what he wants to reveal, and even his own restaurant's history seems to follow that same rule. What stays consistent across every version, though, is the basic shape of the story. A once close friendship between Krabs and Plankton fell apart over money and taste. Whatever specific details differ from episode to episode, the core outcome never changes. One of them ended up with a business that worked, and the other ended up spending years trying to undo that outcome. The Krusty Krab did not begin as a carefully planned business venture built from research and investment. It began almost by accident, out of a failed friendship and a kitchen mistake that happened to taste better than anyone expected. It is worth sitting with how ordinary the beginning actually was. There was no dramatic grand opening, no investors, no careful business plan drawn up in advance. Two young friends wanted to make some money after a competitor shut down. They tried their best with a shared recipe. The recipe failed, they fought, the recipe tore, and somewhere in the mess that followed, one half of that broken friendship got lucky. That luck is the entire reason the Krusty Krab exists at all. Without that accidental mixture landing in the batter at just the right moment, there may never have been a restaurant, a secret formula, a rivalry with the chum bucket, or a fry cook named SpongeBob showing up years later looking for a job. This origin also explains something that becomes important later, which is why the formula itself is treated with so much secrecy. It was never handed down through careful planning or protected from day one as some grand invention. It was created by chance, in the middle of a personal falling out, and it worked so well that it became the single most valuable thing Krabs has ever owned. Once something valuable is created by accident, there is no way to recreate it on purpose if it is ever lost, which is exactly why Krabs has spent so much energy since that day, making sure nobody else, especially Plankton, ever gets close enough to figure out what actually went into it. By the time the Krusty Krab shows up in the very first episode of the series, none of this history is visible on screen. Customers walking through the door see a normal, functioning restaurant with a menu, a cash register, and 2 employees already at their stations. They have no idea that the food they are eating exists because of a fight between 2 childhood friends and a batch of batter that got ruined in exactly the right way. That gap between what customers see and what actually happened behind the scenes says a lot about how businesses like this one tend to work. The polished version people experience rarely matches the messy reality that built it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of this explains, though, what the restaurant actually looks like from the outside, or why it was built the way it was. A business with a story this strange still needed a physical building to operate out of, something customers could walk toward, recognize, and remember. That building did not appear by accident the way the recipe did. Someone had to design it, choose its shape, and decide what it would look like sitting at the bottom of the ocean floor for everyone in town to see every single day. Section 2. The building itself. Long before anyone could sit down and eat a burger at the bottom of the ocean, someone had to figure out what that restaurant should actually look like sitting there on the sea floor. A cartoon town needs buildings that fit its world, and a fast food restaurant sitting on the ocean floor needed a design that made sense for fish customers, crab owners, and a sponge fry cook. The building that eventually became known across the world as the Krusty Krab did not happen by chance the way the secret formula did. It was designed on purpose, with a clear idea behind its shape, and that idea traces back to the same man who once worked behind a real restaurant counter as a teenager. Steven Hillenburg based the physical design of the restaurant on something very specific and very real, a lobster trap. Anyone who has ever seen a traditional lobster trap knows the basic shape, a boxy wooden frame with wire or slats running around the sides, built to sit on the ocean floor and hold whatever gets caught inside it. Hillenburg took that familiar shape and turned it into the outline of a building, giving the whole restaurant a wooden, cage-like structure that immediately reads as something that belongs underwater rather than on land. It was a smart choice for a show built entirely around ocean life, since almost nothing about the design breaks the illusion of a town that exists beneath the surface of the sea. A hamburger stand shaped like a normal building on land would have looked completely out of place sitting next to coral, sand, and seaweed. A building shaped like a lobster trap fits right into that world without needing any extra explanation. Even the name of the restaurant went through a small but interesting change before the show ever aired. In its earliest planning stages, the crab character was going to be named Krabs rather than Krabs, and the restaurant itself was going to be called the Krusty Krab rather than the Krusty Krab. Shortly before the pilot episode went into production, Hillenburg made the decision to swap the C sounds for K sounds across both names. Well, the reasoning behind the switch was simple. He felt that names using K's sounded funnier and were easier for people to remember. That small spelling change ended up sticking permanently, and every version of the restaurant's name since then, in every episode, every piece of merchandise, and every mention across the franchise, has used the K spelling instead of the original C spelling. It is a tiny piece of the restaurant's history, but it shows that even something as small as a letter swap was a deliberate choice made for a clear reason, not something left up to chance. Standing outside the restaurant today, in nearly every episode where the building appears, there is a large sign, shaped like a clam sitting out front. This sign works exactly the way signs work for real fast food restaurants on land, giving the building a recognizable symbol that customers can spot from a distance before they even get close enough to read any words. Fast food chains in the real world often rely on a specific shape, a specific color, or a specific character to make their restaurant instantly recognizable, and the clam-shaped sign in front of the Krusty Krab serves that exact same purpose inside the show. Anyone swimming through Bikini Bottom who spots that clam shape in the distance knows immediately what restaurant sits nearby, without needing to read a single word. Above the front door of the restaurant, there is another detail that ties directly into the ocean setting, a row of 5 international maritime signal flags. In the real world, sailors and ships have used signal flags like these for a very long time as a way to communicate messages between vessels without needing radios or spoken language. Each flag represents a different letter or message, and ships flying certain combinations could send information to other ships nearby just through the flags themselves. Placing a row of these signal flags above the entrance to the restaurant fits perfectly with the underwater, nautical feeling that runs through the entire design of the building. It is a small detail that a lot of viewers might walk past without noticing, but it adds another layer connecting the restaurant to the wider theme of ships, sailors, and ocean travel that shows up throughout the series in other ways as well, including Mr. Krabs' own history of serving in the Navy. Walking through the front door and into the restaurant itself, the very first thing anyone notices is the size of the main eating area. Like most fast food restaurants anywhere, whether underwater or on land, the dining room takes up the largest portion of the available space inside the building. This is where customers sit down, eat their food, and spend most of their time while visiting. What makes the dining room stand out from a normal fast food restaurant, though, is the furniture filling it. Instead of ordinary tables and chairs, the Krusty Krab uses old sailing ship steering wheels as tables. These wheels, the large wooden circles that sailors once used to steer their ships by hand, sit flat and serve as the surface where customers place their food and drinks while they eat. Surrounding these wheel-shaped tables are barrels standing in for chairs, giving customers something to sit on that continues the same nautical feel running through every other part of the building. This choice of furniture is not just a fun visual joke thrown in for its own sake. It reinforces the same idea that shaped the outside of the building in the first place, which is that everything about this restaurant should feel connected to ships, sailors, and life on the ocean. A steering wheel turned into a table and a barrel turned into a chair are both objects that would have realistically existed on old sailing ships, long before anyone imagined a talking crab running a burger restaurant underwater. By filling the dining room with these kinds of objects, the design keeps reminding anyone watching that this entire town sits at the bottom of the sea, surrounded by shipwrecks, old sailing equipment, and everything else that might have sunk to the ocean floor over the years. Moving further into the restaurant, past the dining area, sits the order station, which functions as the point where customers place their food orders and pay for their meals. This is where the cash register sits, and it is also where Squidward spends the overwhelming majority of his working hours. Customers walk up to this station, place their order, hand over their money, and then wait for their food to come out through a special opening that connects the front of the restaurant to the kitchen and back. That opening is shaped like the bow of a ship, meaning it has that same pointed, curved front end that sailing ships have at the very front of their hulls. Food passes through this bow-shaped window from the kitchen side, where SpongeBob prepares it, out to the front side, where Squidward hands it over to waiting customers. In some episodes, there is also a telephone sitting near this order station, giving customers or outside callers a way to reach the restaurant directly by phone, whether to place a call in order, ask a question, or reach Mr. Krabs about something else entirely. Near this same order window, depending on the episode, additional small stations sometimes appear as well. A salad stand shows up in certain episodes, giving customers access to fresh toppings or a lighter menu option beyond the standard burger and fries. A separate station, sometimes called the Condiment Island, also appears near the order window in some episodes, stocked with ketchup and other sauces that customers can use to top off their food before sitting down to eat. These additions are not present in every single episode, since the show does not always show the full layout of the restaurant in complete detail every time a scene takes place inside it. When they do appear, though, they add a bit more detail to how a working fast food kitchen actually functions, giving customers a self-serve option for extra toppings, rather than needing to ask an employee for everything by hand. Behind the main dining room and order station sits the back portion of the restaurant, which holds several additional rooms. Exactly how these rooms are arranged, and which specific rooms show up in any given episode, has never stayed perfectly consistent across the entire run of the series. Different episodes have shown slightly different versions of what exists in the back of the building, and the exact order of these rooms shifts depending on which episode happens to be showing them. Despite that inconsistency, certain rooms tend to show up again and again in roughly similar positions relative to each other, giving viewers a general sense of what exists behind the kitchen, even without a perfectly fixed floor plan. This kind of inconsistency is common in long-running animated shows, where different writers and different animators handle different episodes over the course of many years, and small details like the exact layout of a fictional building's back rooms are not always treated as something that needs to match perfectly from one episode to the next. What stays constant, no matter how the back rooms shift around from episode to episode, is that this area of the building handles everything that customers never actually see while eating their meal. The kitchen where SpongeBob cooks sits somewhere in this back section, along with whatever storage space the restaurant uses to keep its ingredients, along with Mr. Krabs' personal office space, and along with the safe that holds the secret formula, once that safe becomes the formula's permanent home later in the show's history. All of the actual running of the business, the part that keeps the whole operation functioning day after day, happens out of sight in this back portion of the building, while the front dining room and order station handle everything customers directly experience. One detail about the building's schedule adds an interesting piece to how the restaurant actually runs from week to week. In an early episode of the series, it becomes clear that the Krusty Krab is closed on Sundays. This means the restaurant does not operate every single day of the week without exception. Like plenty of real-world businesses, it takes at least one day off on a regular basis, giving the building itself, along with its employees, a scheduled break, rather than running non-stop with no days off at all. This detail might seem small, but it shows that even a business run by someone as focused on making money as Mr. Krabs still follows a normal weekly schedule, rather than keeping the doors open every single day without rest. Over the many years the show has aired, the physical building itself has taken a surprising amount of damage across different episodes, and each instance shows a different way the structure can be affected by outside forces. In one episode, SpongeBob ends up driving into the restaurant while learning to operate a vehicle, and his poor driving skills cause him to crash into several different parts of the building one after another, hitting the sign, the door, the front wall, the roof, and the right side of the structure in a single chaotic sequence. In a different episode, the restaurant appears already destroyed at the very start of the story, without much explanation given for how that destruction happened before the episode began. In another episode, a large anchor gets pulled along by a powerful rip current running through the water outside, and that anchor slams directly into the roof of the building, tearing open a hole in the structure. In yet another episode, the interior of the restaurant ends up completely covered in garbage after SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally destroy a trash bag while inside, scattering its contents everywhere across the dining room and kitchen. That same episode involving the garbage takes things even further, since it also includes a scene where Squidward, acting out a supervillain role during a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy performance with SpongeBob and Patrick, attempts to use hot cooking oil against the two of them as part of the act. SpongeBob and Patrick manage to stop him by knocking over a nearby fry basket, and the force of that fry basket falling causes Squidward and Mr. Krabs to end up getting fried instead of the two friends. The impact from that same fry basket falling turns out to be strong enough that it causes the entire restaurant to crumble apart, leading to the building being destroyed by the end of that particular sequence of events. Taken together, these different instances of damage across multiple episodes show that despite its wooden, cage-like frame, built to resemble something as sturdy as a lobster trap, the Krusty Krab is not treated as some indestructible structure standing forever unaffected by whatever chaos happens to swirl around it. Vehicles crash into it, ocean currents send debris crashing through its roof, garbage floods its floors, and fry baskets full of hot oil manage to bring the entire building down in the right circumstances. Every single time this kind of damage happens, though, the restaurant returns in later episodes fully repaired and back to normal, ready to open its doors again, as though nothing had ever happened to it. This pattern fits the way long-running cartoons often handle damage to recurring locations, treating destruction as something that can happen for the sake of a specific episode's story, without permanently changing the setting that viewers will keep returning to episode after episode for years to come. The building's construction using a wooden frame, combined with glass windows and walls, plays directly into how easily it seems to take on this kind of damage in different stories. Wood and glass are materials that can crack, break, and burn relatively easily, compared to something built from steel or heavier material, which lines up with how often the restaurant ends up damaged across different episodes throughout the show's history. At the same time, this same lighter, wooden construction fits perfectly with the lobster trap design that inspired the building in the first place, since real lobster traps are typically built from wood and wire rather than heavy metal, keeping the entire structure visually connected back to its original inspiration, even while it takes damage again and again across different stories. Every part of this building, from the clam-shaped sign out front to the ship's steering wheel tables inside, works together to create a location that feels specifically underwater and specifically nautical, rather than looking like any generic fast food restaurant simply dropped onto the ocean floor without any thought given to its surroundings. The signal flags above the door connect back to old sailing traditions. The barrels used as chairs and the wheels used as tables connect back to actual ship equipment. Even the closed schedule on Sundays gives the building a sense of following a normal operating rhythm, the same way any real restaurant would need a break at some point during the week. Every piece of the design, whether large or small, ties back into the same underwater, ocean-going theme that runs through the entire show, giving the Krusty Krab a physical identity that matches everything else happening inside its walls and inside the wider town surrounding it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of this explains, though, exactly what customers are eating once they sit down at one of those steering wheel tables. The building itself might be shaped like a lobster trap and decorated with old ship parts, but the food coming out through that bow-shaped kitchen window is the entire reason people keep coming back through the front door in the first place. Understanding what actually goes into that food, and how much of it has ever really been confirmed, means moving away from the building entirely and looking directly at what sits on the plate. Section 3. The Krabby Patty itself. Sitting on top of one of those steering wheel tables, wrapped in a simple paper wrapper or resting on a plate, is the reason any of this restaurant exists at all. The building can be shaped like a lobster trap and filled with old ship parts, but none of that would matter if the food coming out of the kitchen was not good enough to keep people coming back. The Krabby Patty is the single item that built the entire business, and it has stayed the center of the menu since the very first episode of the series. Despite being the most famous food item in the entire show, and despite showing up in hundreds of episodes over more than 2 decades, the actual patty itself has remained one of the most carefully guarded mysteries in the whole series. The Krabby Patty made its very first appearance in the pilot episode of the show, the same episode that introduced the Krusty Krab itself, and set up the working relationship between Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and SpongeBob. From that very first episode onward, the burger became the anchor of the entire menu, the one item that every other food choice at the restaurant would end up standing next to for the rest of the show's run. Unlike a lot of fictional food items that show up once and disappear, the Krabby Patty has remained central to nearly every single storyline connected to the Krusty Krab, whether that storyline involves cooking it, protecting its recipe, selling it, or trying to steal it away from the restaurant entirely. At its most basic level, The Krabby Patty is described consistently across the show as a burger made up of buns, undersea vegetables, mustard and ketchup, and a patty sitting in the middle holding everything together. Cheese can also be added as an option for anyone who wants it. This basic description matches how a normal hamburger works in the real world, built from a bun on the bottom, various toppings layered on top of each other, and a patty serving as the main piece of food at the center of the whole sandwich. The undersea setting changes some of the specific ingredients used, but the overall structure of the burger follows the same basic pattern that fast food burgers follow anywhere else. Looking more closely at what actually goes into building a Krabby Patty, several specific ingredients have been confirmed and shown on screen repeatedly throughout the series. The bun itself comes in two separate pieces, a top half and a bottom half, with the top half specifically covered in sesame seeds, while the bottom half stays plain. Between those two halves sits a collection of ingredients that have appeared again and again whenever the show takes time to show a patty actually being assembled. These confirmed ingredients include sea cheese, sea lettuce, sea tomato, pickles, ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, and sea onions. Every one of these ingredients lines up with something a normal hamburger might include on land, just renamed slightly to fit the underwater setting the show takes place in. Lettuce becomes sea lettuce, regular tomato becomes sea tomato, regular onions become sea onions. The overall structure stays familiar, even while every ingredient gets its own small underwater twist in its name. Beyond these named toppings, every single Krabby Patty also includes two elements that the show has never actually explained in any real detail: the patty itself and something known as the secret sauce. Both of these pieces are treated completely differently from every other ingredient on the burger. While lettuce, tomato, onions, and the rest of the toppings are all clearly visible and named whenever a patty gets built on screen, the patty and the secret sauce stay a mystery no matter how many times the show shows someone building a burger from scratch. This distinction matters a great deal, since it means that even though viewers have technically seen almost every layer of a Krabby Patty get put together piece by piece across hundreds of episodes, the two most important parts of that burger have never actually been revealed. One episode in particular gives viewers the clearest official answer about the correct order that these ingredients are supposed to go in. According to SpongeBob himself in that episode, the correct order running from the bottom of the burger to the top goes as follows. First comes the bottom bun, then comes the patty, then comes lettuce, then comes cheese, then comes onion, then comes tomato, then comes ketchup, then comes mustard, then comes pickles, and finally, at the very top, comes the top bun to close the whole sandwich. This order gives the clearest single confirmation the show has ever offered about exactly how a proper Krabby Patty is meant to be assembled, layer by layer, from the very bottom all the way up to the very top. That said, this exact order has not always been followed perfectly in every other episode where a patty gets shown being built, since different episodes across such a long-running series have sometimes shown slightly different sequences depending on the specific scene being written at the time. The question of what the patty is actually made from has attracted a huge amount of curiosity from people who have watched the show over the years, and this curiosity eventually led to all sorts of guesses and theories floating around outside the show itself. Some of these outside theories got dark and strange, wondering out loud whether the patty might be made from something unpleasant, given the odd, alien-looking creatures that live throughout Bikini Bottom. These theories spread widely enough that Steven Hillenburg himself eventually addressed the question directly. He confirmed publicly that the patties served at the Krusty Krab are entirely vegan, meaning they contain no meat or animal-based ingredients of any kind. This single statement from the show's own creator shut down a huge number of outside theories at once, since it came directly from the person who created the entire world the show takes place in. Despite this confirmation clearing up the basic nature of the patty, the exact ingredients that actually make up that vegan patty have still never been listed out in specific detail anywhere in the show itself. In one particular episode, the actual written formula for the Krabby Patty does appear on screen, showing the physical paper that lists out the ingredients. When this moment happens, though, the ingredients shown on that paper are written as random, meaningless text rather than actual readable words. This was confirmed directly by Vincent Waller, one of the people who worked on the show, through a public statement explaining exactly why this choice was made. According to that statement, the ingredients were deliberately written as nonsense, specifically so that no one watching the show would be able to figure out the true ingredients just by pausing the episode and reading the paper closely. Along with that explanation, Waller also confirmed directly that there is no meat whatsoever inside a Krabby Patty, matching exactly what Hillenburg had already said publicly about the patty being vegan. Between these two separate confirmations, coming from two different people involved in actually making the show, the meatless nature of the Krabby Patty stands as one of the most solidly confirmed facts about the entire menu, even while the specific ingredients making up that meatless patty remain locked away from public knowledge. The Krabby Patty has not stayed as a single unchanging item throughout the entire run of the show either. Over the years, different episodes have introduced a wide range of variations on the basic burger, each one built around some kind of twist on the original recipe. Some of these variations came from Mr. Krabs himself experimenting with new products to sell. Others came from SpongeBob trying out his own ideas in the kitchen. Still others came from Plankton attempting to create his own competing version using stolen or copied elements of the original formula. Each of these variations carries its own name and its own specific twist, giving the menu a surprising amount of variety, built around what still remains, at its heart, the same basic type of underwater burger. One especially interesting piece of Krabby Patty history involves an item called the Krusty Dog, which briefly appeared on the menu at one point, before disappearing entirely and never coming back. The Krusty Dog was removed from the menu after a specific chain of events involving SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, tied to a moment where Krabs had actually pulled the Krabby Patty itself off the menu entirely. SpongeBob ended up sabotaging one of the Krusty Dogs during that stretch of time, and following that incident, the item never returned to the menu again. This piece of history shows that the menu at the Krusty Krab has not always looked exactly the way most viewers remember it, and that at least one attempt to introduce a different signature item alongside or instead of the Krabby Patty did not end up sticking around for the long run. Beyond the burger itself, the Krusty Krab has always sold a range of other food and drink items alongside its signature product. These additional items get grouped together under a name used within the show itself, referred to as galley grub. This wider selection includes typical fast food staples that would look familiar in almost any restaurant on land, including French fries and sodas, giving customers standard side options to go along with their burger order. Alongside these familiar items, the menu also includes food that fits specifically into the underwater setting the restaurant exists in, including items like coral bits and kelp rings. These underwater-themed sides give the menu its own unique identity, beyond simply copying a normal fast food menu word for word, blending recognizable fast food staples with food that only makes sense within an ocean-based world. One particularly strange and important piece of information about the Krabby Patty comes from an episode where the show reveals that these burgers are actually addictive. This detail comes directly from an episode where the addictive quality of the burger becomes a central part of the story, showing characters struggling to resist eating far more Krabby Patties than they should, driven by cravings that go beyond simple enjoyment of a tasty meal. This same episode is also where viewers first learn about the existence of something called the Patty Vault, a separate storage area within the Krusty Krab specifically built to hold large numbers of already prepared Krabby Patties at once. This detail creates an interesting contradiction within the show's own established rules, since SpongeBob himself states earlier in that same episode that Krabby Patties are supposed to be eaten fresh, immediately after being cooked, rather than sitting prepared and waiting inside some kind of storage vault. Despite that stated rule, the Patty Vault clearly exists as a location within the restaurant, stocked with patties that are not being served immediately fresh off the grill, the way the normal process is usually shown working in most other episodes. This same Patty Vault has gone on to show up in more than just that one original episode. It appears again later on as a cameo within the feature-length movie based on the show, giving it a small but recognizable presence within the wider franchise, beyond just the television series itself. Beyond that movie appearance, the Patty Vault has also become an important location within video game adaptations of the franchise, serving as the primary setting for at least one boss fight sequence within a game based on the show. It has even been turned into physical merchandise outside of the show entirely, appearing as the image used for a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle sold to fans. All of this shows that the Patty Vault, despite starting out as a single detail within one specific episode, has grown into a recognizable and lasting piece of the wider Krabby Patty mythology surrounding the restaurant. Taken all together, the Krabby Patty stands as one of the most carefully built mysteries in the entire show, built specifically to stay just out of reach no matter how closely anyone pays attention. Viewers have seen nearly every visible topping that goes into building one, from the sesame seed bun down to the pickles sitting near the top. Viewers have heard direct, official confirmation from the people who actually created the show that the patty itself contains no meat and qualifies as fully vegan. Viewers have even seen the actual written formula appear on screen at least once, only to find that the writing itself has been deliberately scrambled into nonsense, specifically to prevent anyone from ever learning the real ingredients. Every piece of information the show has ever offered about this burger seems to come paired with another piece of information, making sure the most important details stay locked away. That pattern of visible ingredients, paired with hidden secrets, fits perfectly with a restaurant built entirely around one closely guarded formula, sitting inside a safe that has spent years standing between one crab's fortune and one small green creature's endless attempts to steal it away. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Nothing about the ingredients, the toppings, or the vegan status of the patty explains, though, exactly how that formula has managed to stay protected for so long, especially with someone living right across the street who has spent his entire life trying to get his hands on it. Understanding how the Krusty Krab actually keeps its most valuable secret safe, physically and otherwise, means moving past the food itself and looking directly at where that formula lives, how it has been hidden, and what happens every time someone gets close enough to threaten it. Section 4. The secret formula, and how it's actually guarded somewhere. Inside the Krusty Krab sits a small glass bottle, and that bottle holds the single most valuable object in the entire restaurant. It is not the cash register full of money, and it is not the grill where the burgers get cooked. It is a piece of paper, sealed inside glass, carrying the written formula for the Krabby Patty. Every single detail about how this restaurant runs, from the customers lining up at the counter to the rivalry sitting just across the street, traces back to whatever is written on that paper. Understanding how the Krusty Krab actually protects this one object says more about how the entire business operates than almost anything else connected to the restaurant. The physical form of the secret formula has stayed remarkably consistent throughout the show. It exists as a formula written in ink on a piece of paper, and that paper sits sealed inside a small, see-through, light blue glass bottle. A cork sits on top of the bottle, closing off the opening and keeping the paper safely sealed inside. This bottle and cork combination gives the formula a look that fits perfectly with the ocean setting surrounding it, since bottles sealed with corks have long been associated with messages sent out across the sea, floating from ship to ship, or washing up on shore after being tossed into the water. Even something as serious as a business secret worth an entire restaurant's success ends up wrapped in imagery connected to the ocean world the show takes place in. The formula itself first gets mentioned by name in an early episode simply called Plankton, which introduces the basic idea that this secret recipe exists and that Plankton wants to get his hands on it. The formula would not actually appear as a physical object on screen, though, until a later episode called Imitation Krabs. That episode marks the first time viewers actually get to see the bottle itself, giving a face, or at least a shape, to something that had already been talked about and fought over for a while before ever actually showing up in physical form. This gap between the formula being mentioned and the formula actually appearing on screen shows how long some ideas can sit in the background of a long-running show before finally getting a proper physical presence within the story. Where exactly this bottle gets kept has not stayed the same throughout the entire run of the series. In one particular episode called Plankton's Army, Squidward reveals a detail about where the formula used to be hidden, stating that it could be found at Mr. Krabs' own house, hidden underneath his mattress. This detail paints a very different picture of how the formula was protected at that point, compared to how it gets protected later on. Keeping something this valuable tucked under a mattress, inside a personal home, is a simple, almost old-fashioned way of hiding something precious, the kind of hiding spot anyone might use for cash or jewelry, rather than a business secret, responsible for an entire restaurant's success. For at least that stretch of the show's history, the most valuable object connected to the Krusty Krab was not even kept inside the restaurant itself. At some point after that, the formula's location shifted permanently. For the remainder of the series going forward, the formula gets kept inside a safe, located within the Krusty Krab itself. This move from a bedroom mattress to a proper safe inside the actual restaurant makes a lot of sense given how central the formula is to the business. Keeping it at Krab's personal home meant that anyone breaking into his house, rather than the restaurant, could potentially get their hands on it. Moving it into a safe inside the Krusty Krab put the formula in the same physical location as the business it belonged to, closer to Krabs during his working hours, and presumably surrounded by whatever additional security the restaurant itself might offer. This shift represents one of the clearest examples of the restaurant actually adapting its own security approach over time, moving the formula from a spot that made sense for a private individual protecting a personal secret into a spot that made more sense for a business protecting its most important asset. The reason all of this security matters so much comes down to one specific ongoing threat that has never gone away throughout the entire show. Plankton, running his own restaurant called the Chum Bucket, directly across the street from the Krusty Krab, has spent years trying to get his hands on this exact formula. His restaurant sells food that almost nobody in Bikini Bottom wants to eat, and Plankton has made it extremely clear across dozens of episodes that he believes stealing the Krabby Patty formula would completely turn his failing business around. If he could copy the exact formula that makes Krabby Patties so popular, he could sell the same product himself, using it to finally compete on equal footing with the restaurant that has always outsold him. This ongoing conflict has produced one of the most consistent storylines running throughout the entire series, a running plot involving Plankton, coming up with plan after plan to either steal the formula outright or steal a completed Krabby Patty that he could somehow analyze to figure out the recipe hidden inside it. Nearly every single one of these plans has ended in failure. Whether Plankton tries sneaking into the restaurant directly, building some kind of invention specifically designed to extract the formula, or attempting some other creative scheme entirely, something almost always goes wrong before he manages to walk away with what he actually wants. This pattern of repeated failure has become such a defining part of his character that audiences have come to expect it, treating each new theft attempt less as a serious threat to the restaurant and more as another entry in a very long-running joke about how badly things tend to go for him. Not every single attempt has ended in complete failure, though. There have been moments across the show's history where Plankton has actually succeeded in getting his hands on the formula, if only for a short period of time, before it inevitably gets taken back. Two of the most notable examples of this happened during the two feature-length movies connected to the franchise. In both of these films, Plankton manages to actually take the formula away from the Krusty Krab and gain possession of it, at least temporarily. In both cases, though, the formula ultimately ends up returned, either through the direct efforts of SpongeBob and his friends, or through some other chain of events that brings the recipe safely back to where it belongs. This detail matters because it shows that the formula is not treated as some completely untouchable object that nothing can ever actually reach. It has genuinely been stolen before, more than once, showing that Plankton's efforts are not always doomed the second they begin. What stays consistent, no matter how the theft happens or how long Plankton manages to hold on to it, is that the formula always finds its way back home eventually. Plankton is not the only character connected to these theft attempts either. His computer wife, Karen, has played a significant role in several of these schemes across different episodes, often providing Plankton with specific plans designed to help him steal the formula successfully. In addition to helping plan these thefts, Karen has also taken a more direct approach on at least two separate occasions, using her own abilities to analyze a Krabby Patty directly rather than relying on stealing the written formula itself. In one episode called Single Cell Anniversary, Karen actually succeeds in extracting the formula through this kind of direct analysis. Unfortunately for Plankton, this particular success gets erased before he ever actually gets to benefit from it, since Karen ends up exploding during that same episode, taking the extracted formula down with her before Plankton ever gets a proper look at what she managed to figure out. In a separate episode called For Here or To Go, Karen attempts this same kind of analysis a second time, but this attempt fails for a very different reason. By the time she tries to analyze the patty in question, Plankton's own body had already started digesting it, meaning there was nothing left in a state that could actually be properly examined and broken down into a usable formula. These two specific failures involving Karen highlight something important about how difficult it has actually been for anyone outside of Krabs himself to successfully extract this formula and walk away with something usable. Even when the theft itself technically works, even when Karen genuinely manages to pull the formula out through her own analysis, something else always goes wrong immediately afterward that prevents Plankton from actually benefiting from what was stolen. Whether that failure comes from an explosion or from digestion happening too quickly, the pattern stays the same. Success in stealing the formula and success in actually using that stolen formula have turned out to be two completely different challenges, and Plankton has never managed to fully accomplish both at the same time. Beyond Plankton's repeated attempts, the security surrounding the formula has occasionally become a storyline in its own right, separate from any specific theft attempt happening at that moment. In one episode called The Patty Caper, the formula ends up placed inside a vault located far away from the restaurant itself, specifically for the purpose of keeping it safe. This represents yet another shift in how the formula gets protected, moving it even further from its usual home, inside the Krusty Krab safe, and into a separate, distant location built specifically around heightened security. During this same episode, Mr. Krabs forgets the actual recipe himself, and this memory lapse leads him to hand SpongeBob the key needed to access that distant vault, sending him on a lengthy train journey specifically to retrieve the formula and bring it back. Partway through that journey, someone manages to steal the key away from SpongeBob, turning the entire episode into a mystery focused on figuring out exactly who took it and how to get it back before the formula itself falls into the wrong hands. That same episode brings together an unusual mix of characters working alongside each other to solve the mystery, with SpongeBob eventually turning to Plankton himself as an ally in trying to track down whoever stole the key. This detail stands out as one of the more surprising moments connected to the formula's ongoing security story, since Plankton spends the overwhelming majority of the show working directly against the interests of the Krusty Krab. Yet in this specific episode, he ends up working alongside SpongeBob rather than against him, at least for the length of that particular mystery. Along the way, SpongeBob and Patrick end up questioning several different characters connected to the events of that episode, including Plankton, Sandy, Gary, and Squidward, trying to figure out who might have taken the key and why. By the end of the episode, none of these particular characters turn out to have actually been responsible for taking the recipe, showing that the mystery ultimately pointed towards someone else entirely, rather than any of the more obvious suspects connected to the Krusty Krab or the Chum Bucket. Separate from Plankton's efforts, and separate from these individual security-related episodes, the show has also touched on Mr. Krabs' own personal efforts to improve the security surrounding the formula over time. Rather than treating the safe or the hidden location as something fixed and unchanging forever, certain episodes have shown Krabs actively working to upgrade whatever system currently exists for protecting the recipe, adding new layers of protection, specifically aimed at making sure nobody, especially Plankton, can get through as easily as they might have before. This detail fits naturally with Krabs' personality, as someone who understands exactly how much money and success depends on that one small bottle staying out of anyone else's hands. A Krab who spends this much energy protecting his fortune in general was never going to leave the formula sitting behind some outdated or easily beaten security setup for the entire length of the show without at least occasionally taking steps to strengthen it. Separate from the written formula itself, the show has also introduced a completely different kind of storage connected to the Krabby Patty, known as the Patty Vault. Unlike the formula, which exists as a single sealed bottle holding written instructions, the Patty Vault holds large numbers of already prepared Krabby Patties stored together in one place. This vault operates independently from the formula's own security setup, since it is not protecting a written recipe, but rather protecting a large stockpile of finished food. Squidward, in one particular episode, manages to sneak into the restaurant at night, specifically to access this vault, hoping to eat one of the patties stored inside without anyone else finding out. His plan gets interrupted, though, when SpongeBob reveals that he actually comes into work at 3 in the morning on a regular basis, specifically to count the sesame seeds sitting on top of each bun. This detail reveals an almost obsessive level of dedication on SpongeBob's part toward his job, showing that even something as small and seemingly unimportant as counting sesame seeds gets treated with genuine seriousness by the one employee most responsible for actually making the food in the first place. That same encounter between Squidward and the Patty Vault ends up escalating well beyond a simple attempt to sneak a free snack. Once SpongeBob catches him, Squidward ends up confessing something that goes directly against how he usually acts throughout the rest of the show, admitting that he actually loves Krabby Patties, despite constantly acting annoyed by his job and by the restaurant in general. Following that confession, Squidward proceeds to eat a large number of the burgers stored inside the vault, eventually eating so many that he ends up exploding and needing to be taken away by paramedics. This moment stands out as one of the clearest pieces of evidence connected to an earlier detail about the Krabby Patty, the fact that these burgers have been shown elsewhere in the series to be genuinely addictive. Squidward's behavior in this scene, moving from sneaking a single bite to eating an overwhelming number of patties in a row, lines up directly with that established addictive quality, showing what can happen when someone with access to the vault loses control around this specific food. Beyond this specific storyline, the Patty Vault has continued showing up in other corners of the wider franchise as well. It makes a brief appearance within the feature-length movie based on the show, giving it a place within the larger connected universe beyond just the original television series. It also becomes an important setting within video game adaptations connected to the franchise, serving specifically as the location for a boss fight against a character called Squidbot. Even outside of the show and its games entirely, the Patty Vault eventually became the subject of its own physical jigsaw puzzle, built out of 500 separate pieces and sold as merchandise for fans of the series. All of this shows that a single storage room, introduced originally within one specific episode, focused mainly on the addictive nature of Krabby Patties, has grown over time into a recognizable and lasting part of the wider world connected to the restaurant. Taken together, the formula and the Patty Vault represent two separate but connected systems built around protecting the most valuable things the Krusty Krab actually owns. One protects the written knowledge needed to make a Krabby Patty in the first place. The other protects a physical stockpile of the finished product itself. Both have shifted locations and shifted levels of protection at different points throughout the show's long history, moving from a bedroom mattress to a restaurant safe to a distant secured vault, and from a quiet storage room to the site of an actual boss battle within a video game. Every one of these systems exists because of one simple, unavoidable fact hanging over the entire restaurant. As long as Plankton keeps running a failing business directly across the street, the Krusty Krab's greatest asset will always need somewhere safe to hide. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A formula sealed inside a bottle does not cook itself, take orders, or hand food through that bow-shaped window. Someone has to actually run the restaurant every single day, and that job has always fallen on a very small number of hands. Section 5. Who actually runs the kitchen? Every single day, the Krusty Krab opens its doors. The same small handful of people show up to keep the entire operation moving. Despite being one of the busiest and most successful restaurants in all of Bikini Bottom, the actual staff running the place has stayed remarkably small since the very beginning of the show. Outside of Mr. Krabs himself, who owns and manages the business, the Krusty Krab has only ever had 2 full-time employees working there on a regular basis. Everything customers experience, from the moment they walk through the front door to the moment they walk back out with a Krabby Patty in hand, runs through the efforts of just these 2 workers, supported by an owner who spends far more time thinking about money than he spends thinking about the actual food. The first of these 2 employees is SpongeBob SquarePants, who works as the restaurant's fry cook. This job puts him in charge of actually cooking the food, standing at the grill for hours at a time, flipping patties, assembling burgers, and sending finished orders out through the kitchen window toward the front counter. SpongeBob got this job during the very first episode of the entire series, an episode called Help Wanted. In that episode, SpongeBob applies for the fry cook position, but Mr. Krabs and Squidward do not want him working there and decide to have a bit of fun at his expense instead. Rather than giving him a fair shot at the job, the two of them send him out on what amounts to a pointless errand, expecting him to simply go away and stop bothering them. While SpongeBob is gone chasing after this fake task, a massive crowd of anchovies suddenly storms into the restaurant, overwhelming Squidward and Krabs, and putting both of them in real danger of getting hurt or trampled. When SpongeBob eventually makes his way back to the restaurant, he steps in and reveals a level of skill behind the grill that neither Krabs nor Squidward expected from him. He manages to serve every single one of the anchovies crowding the restaurant, and in doing so, he saves both Squidward and Krabs from the chaos surrounding them. That single display of ability during an emergency situation is what actually convinces Krabs to hire him properly, securing the fry cook job that would go on to define his character for the rest of the series. From that point forward, SpongeBob has remained deeply devoted to his job, in a way that goes far beyond what most people would consider normal enthusiasm for a fast food position. He loves being a fry cook, takes real pride in doing the work well, and consistently performs at a high level whenever the show puts his cooking skills to the test. Where a lot of workers might treat a burger flipping job as something temporary or unimportant, SpongeBob treats his role at the Krusty Krab as something meaningful, throwing himself into even the smallest parts of the job with genuine excitement. This attitude shows up again and again throughout the series, whether he is perfecting the exact placement of a pickle or making sure every sesame seed on a bun sits exactly where it belongs. Fry cook duties are not the only responsibilities SpongeBob has taken on over the years either. Beyond cooking, he has also handled janitorial work around the restaurant, cleaning up messes, and keeping the building in working order whenever something needs tidying. He has stepped into a cashier role on at least one occasion as well, specifically during an episode where he takes on the position described as co-cashier alongside his usual cooking duties. Beyond these more typical restaurant jobs, SpongeBob has also picked up a wide range of much stranger, one-time tasks connected to the business over the years. In one episode, he ends up handling parking lot litter patrol. In another, he takes on the job of retrieving money that had ended up down a well. In yet another, he serves as the lead reporter for something called the Krabby Chronicle, a publication connected to the restaurant that required him to gather and report information rather than cook or clean at all. Each of these smaller jobs shows how flexible SpongeBob has been willing to be for Mr. Krabs, taking on almost any task asked of him without much complaint, regardless of how far outside his usual fry cook duties that task might fall. The most significant shift in SpongeBob's role within the business happened at the very end of the feature-length movie, based on the show. By that point in the story, Mr. Krabs had already opened a second restaurant called the Krusty Krab 2, and following the events that take place throughout the movie, SpongeBob ends up hired as the manager of this new second location. This moment marks a real change in his position within the business, moving him from a fry cook working under someone else's direct supervision into a manager role responsible for overseeing an entire second restaurant on his own. It stands as one of the clearest examples across the whole franchise of SpongeBob's career actually growing and changing over time, rather than staying completely frozen in the same fry cook position he started out in that very first episode. The second full-time employee at the Krusty Krab is Squidward Tentacles, who works as the restaurant's cashier. His job puts him at the front counter, standing near the cash register, taking orders from customers as they walk in, and handing them their food once it comes through the kitchen window from SpongeBob's side. Where SpongeBob throws himself into his job with genuine enthusiasm, Squidward's attitude toward his own position could not be more different. He does not enjoy working at the Krusty Krab, does not enjoy the food the restaurant sells, and generally does not enjoy being around his coworkers either. Despite feeling this way about nearly every part of his job, Squidward has never actually left the position for good. He makes very little real effort to search for different work elsewhere, and on the rare occasions where he has actually attempted to quit, most notably in an episode called Can You Spare a Dime, those attempts have not led to any lasting change in his employment situation. Part of the reason behind Squidward's ongoing frustration with his job comes down to his working relationship with SpongeBob specifically. In certain episodes, including one called Restraining SpongeBob and another called Squid on Strike, SpongeBob's actions at the restaurant end up getting Squidward hurt or getting him into some kind of trouble with Mr. Krabs. These moments add another layer to why Squidward feels so negatively about coming into work every day, since his frustration is not only tied to the job itself, but also tied specifically to working alongside someone whose behavior sometimes creates real problems for him personally. Despite all of this tension, SpongeBob has continued to think of Squidward as one of his closest friends throughout the show, creating a somewhat one-sided dynamic where SpongeBob's warmth toward his coworker rarely gets matched by anything close to the same warmth in return. Even though cashier work makes up the overwhelming majority of what Squidward does at the restaurant, he has stepped into other roles on occasion as well, most notably by working as a fry cook himself in certain episodes when circumstances require it. Two specific episodes highlight this side of his work history clearly: an episode called Bubble Buddy and an episode called Pickles, both of which show Squidward taking over cooking duties rather than sticking to his usual spot behind the register. These moments tend to happen specifically when SpongeBob is unavailable for one reason or another, showing that, despite his general dislike for the entire restaurant, Squidward is still capable of stepping into the kitchen and handling the cooking side of the business when there is genuinely no one else available to do it. Beyond his day-to-day duties as cashier and occasional backup cook, Squidward has also taken on a handful of other tasks connected to the wider Krabs business empire over the years, stepping into different positions whenever a specific scheme or project called for it. At different points, he has worked as a waiter, handling table service duties beyond simply working the front register. He has also worked as a drive-thru attendant during stretches when the restaurant offered that kind of service to customers. Separate from his time at the Krusty Krab itself, Squidward has occasionally taken on a talent director role or worked as a company artist and sculptor whenever Krabs needed those specific skills for some other business venture connected to his larger operation. This range of tasks shows that, much like SpongeBob, Squidward's actual responsibilities have extended well beyond the basic job title most people would associate with him, even though his primary role at the Krusty Krab has always remained the cashier position he has held since the very beginning of the series. Squidward's connection to the Krusty Krab too mirrors SpongeBob's own story in an interesting way, though it plays out with a very different outcome. When Mr. Krabs first opens the second location, he announces a new manager for the restaurant, and SpongeBob assumes going into that announcement that the job will end up being his. Instead, Krabs chooses Squidward for the position, explaining his decision by describing Squidward as more mature compared to SpongeBob. This decision leaves SpongeBob visibly disappointed, having expected a promotion that ultimately went to his coworker instead. Squidward accepts the position and begins acting as manager of the Krusty Krab too, even wearing a small pin on his shirt identifying his new role within the business. This arrangement does not last for the entire length of the movie though. Later on, once SpongeBob returns from his journey to Shell City and manages to save Mr. Krabs from the trouble he had fallen into, Krabs changes his decision and hands the manager position over to SpongeBob instead. This shift means that by the end of the movie, the same manager job that Squidward received ahead of SpongeBob at the very beginning ends up transferring over to SpongeBob permanently, following through on what had originally seemed like the outcome SpongeBob expected from the very start. Beyond these two full-time positions, one very specific detail about staffing costs connects directly back to Mr. Krabs' personality and how he runs his business overall. In one episode, SpongeBob reveals that when he first started working at the Krusty Krab, Krabs actually paid him at a rate of $100 an hour. On its own, this sounds like a surprisingly generous wage for a fast food job, especially given how well-known Krabs is throughout the rest of the series for being extremely careful with money and unwilling to spend more than necessary on almost anything connected to his business. This detail stands out as one of the more unusual pieces of information connected to how the restaurant handles pay, since it does not match the general reputation Krabs has built up across the show as someone who pays his employees as little as he can possibly get away with while still keeping his restaurant fully staffed and running. Looking at the bigger picture, the entire day-to-day operation of the Krusty Krab rests on an extremely small foundation. One owner focused primarily on protecting and growing his money. One fry cook who genuinely loves his job and consistently performs it at a high level. One cashier who dislikes almost everything about his position, but never actually leaves it behind for good. These three characters, working together despite very different attitudes toward the business, have kept the restaurant fully functional across the entire run of the show, long enough for it to become the single most recognizable restaurant in all of Bikini Bottom. No large staff stands behind the counter helping things run smoothly. No hidden team of workers exists somewhere in the back handling extra tasks out of view. Just 3 individuals, each filling a very specific role, keeping the whole business moving forward one order at a time. This small, tightly built staff structure also explains why the restaurant tends to run into serious trouble whenever either SpongeBob or Squidward becomes unavailable for any reason. With only 2 actual employees handling the entire workload of cooking and serving customers, losing even one of them for a single day creates a real strain on how smoothly the business can continue operating. This detail becomes especially important anytime the show introduces a situation where either of them cannot show up for work, since there is no built-in backup team ready to step in and cover the gap without some kind of noticeable disruption to how the restaurant normally functions. That exact kind of disruption ends up becoming its own recurring theme throughout the show's history. Despite the Krusty Krab functioning perfectly well with just these 2 full-time employees under normal circumstances, there have been a surprising number of moments across different episodes where someone else entirely has needed to step in and temporarily fill one of these roles. Whether because SpongeBob or Squidward could not work that day, because Krabs needed extra help during an especially busy stretch, or because some other unusual situation forced a change in who was actually standing behind that counter. These temporary workers have come from every corner of the show's cast of characters, taking on jobs ranging from fry cook to cashier to waiter to security guard, each stepping into the Krusty Krab for a short stretch before disappearing from the payroll entirely once their specific episode wraps up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. SpongeBob and Squidward have never actually been the only 2 names on the payroll. A long, strange list of temporary workers has passed through that same counter over the years, and almost none of them stayed. Section 6. The revolving door of temporary staff. Behind the counter of the Krusty Krab, past SpongeBob and Squidward, sits a much longer list of names that most people watching the show would never think to remember. These are the characters who worked at the restaurant for a single episode, sometimes for only a few minutes of screen time, before disappearing from the business entirely. Some of them quit, some of them got fired, some of them simply vanished from the story once their episode ended, never mentioned again in any later appearance of the restaurant. Together, this group makes up one of the stranger patterns running through the entire show, a business that somehow keeps functioning with just 2 permanent workers, while constantly bringing in and losing a rotating cast of short-term help. One of the earliest examples of this pattern comes from a character named Jim, who worked at the Krusty Krab before SpongeBob ever got hired. According to the show, Jim quit his job specifically because Mr. Krabs refused to give him a raise. This detail matters, because it shows that the fry cook position did not begin with SpongeBob himself. Someone else held that job first, and that someone left because of the exact same issue that defines so much of Krabs' personality throughout the rest of the series, his unwillingness to pay his employees more money. Jim's short mention in the show sets up a pattern that repeats again and again through the restaurant's history, employees leaving not because they dislike the actual work, but because working for Krabs specifically comes with financial frustrations that eventually push people out the door. A more unusual example comes from a character simply known as Not SpongeBob, who worked as the cook at the Krusty Krab before SpongeBob ever took over the position. Beyond his role as an earlier cook, very little else about him gets explained in detail, but his existence on this list adds another name to the growing group of workers who held down the fry cook job before it eventually became permanently associated with SpongeBob. Between Jim and Not SpongeBob, it becomes clear that the fry cook position went through at least a couple of different hands before SpongeBob's hiring turned it into one of the most well-known roles in the entire show. Patrick Star, SpongeBob's closest friend, has held more temporary positions at the Krusty Krab than almost any other side character connected to the restaurant. Across different episodes, Patrick has worked as a waiter, handling table service for customers directly. He has also worked as a sign holder, standing outside holding some kind of advertisement or announcement connected to the business. In addition to these roles, Patrick has stepped in as a replacement fry cook on at least one occasion, taking over cooking duties when the situation called for it. He has also worked in a role described specifically as the falling fool, a strange and specific job title that appears connected to some kind of entertainment or stunt-related task, rather than a normal restaurant duty. On top of all of this, Patrick has also worked as a security guard for the restaurant at some point, taking on a completely different kind of responsibility compared to his other jobs. Very few characters connected to the Krusty Krab have cycled through this many different roles, and Patrick's willingness to take on almost any job asked of him mirrors, in a much sillier way, the same flexibility SpongeBob has shown throughout his own career at the restaurant. Patrick is not the only member of that friend group to spend time working there either. A character named Patricia, who exists as a female counterpart connected to Patrick within certain episodes, has also worked at the restaurant across a range of different jobs. She has served as a waitress, handling the same kind of table service work Patrick himself has done in other episodes. She has also worked as a janitor, taking on cleaning duties around the building. Beyond these more typical restaurant jobs, she has also worked in a fryer position during at least one episode, though according to the show, it was actually Patrick working behind the scenes during that specific fryer role, rather than Patricia handling the job directly herself. This detail adds a strange twist to her employment history, blurring the lines slightly between her own work at the restaurant and Patrick's continued presence within these same short-term jobs. Sandy Cheeks, the squirrel who lives inside an air-filled dome within Bikini Bottom, has also spent time working at the Krusty Krab, though her specific contribution came in a much more physical form compared to some of the other temporary employees. In an episode called Karate Choppers, Sandy takes on the task of chopping Krabby Patties, using her own physical skill and background in martial arts to handle food preparation in a way that looked completely different from how SpongeBob typically approaches the same task using a spatula and a grill. This moment stands out because it shows the restaurant adapting its own cooking process around whichever employee happens to be handling the job at that specific time, rather than sticking to one single, unchanging method, no matter who ends up behind the counter. Pearl, Mr. Krabs' own daughter, has also worked at the restaurant on more than one occasion, despite her father owning the entire business. In an episode called Welcome to the Bikini Bottom Triangle, Pearl steps in as a substitute fry cook, taking over cooking duties during that specific storyline. In a separate episode called Bossy Boots, she works instead as a waitress, handling a completely different kind of task compared to her time behind the grill. Having the owner's own daughter step into these roles adds an interesting layer to how flexible the staffing at the Krusty Krab has always been, showing that even close family members connected to Krabs have needed to pitch in and cover different jobs whenever the business required it. Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail, has held an unusually large number of short-term jobs at the Krusty Krab, given that he is, at the end of the day, a snail rather than a typical employee capable of speech or complex reasoning. In an episode called Band in Bikini Bottom, Gary works as a temporary waiter, somehow managing table service duties despite his limited abilities compared to the other characters working there. In a separate episode called Krabs a la mode, he takes on a completely different role, working as a hockey referee connected to some kind of event tied to the restaurant. In another episode, called Shellback Shenanigans, Gary works as a bouncer, handling a security-style role at the restaurant's entrance. Finally, at the end of an episode called A Pal for Gary, he ends up working as a fry cook, stepping directly into the same cooking role most closely associated with SpongeBob throughout the rest of the series. Gary's presence across this many different jobs adds one of the stranger threads running through the restaurant's overall staffing history, since it is genuinely unusual for a pet snail to end up working so many different positions across a business as large and successful as the Krusty Krab. A character named Carl held the position of general manager during an episode called Krabby Mondays, taking on a much higher level role compared to most of the other temporary workers connected to the restaurant. Rather than simply cooking or serving customers directly, Carl's job placed him in a position of actual authority over how the restaurant operated during that specific storyline, giving him a different kind of responsibility compared to nearly everyone else who has passed through the Krusty Krab on a short-term basis. Karen, Plankton's own computer wife, briefly worked at the Krusty Krab at one point as well, despite being directly connected to the restaurant's biggest rival across the street. According to the show, Karen took this job specifically because Plankton had been treating her unfairly at the Chum Bucket, pushing her to seek work elsewhere rather than continuing to put up with how he was behaving toward her. Once she started working at the Krusty Krab, though, her presence ended up making things worse for the business rather than better, and she was eventually fired as a result. This particular example stands out among the entire list of temporary workers, since it involves a character crossing over from the Krusty Krab's direct competitor and briefly working for the enemy business before being let go and presumably returning to her usual role connected to Plankton and the Chum Bucket. A character referred to as Mr. LeSchnook came to the Krusty Krab during an exchange program described within one specific episode. His presence at the restaurant ended up causing serious financial trouble, pushing the business into bankruptcy due to his repeated demands for expensive, fancy items that did not fit with how the Krusty Krab normally operated. This example shows a very different kind of problem compared to most of the other temporary workers on this list. Rather than simply doing a poor job or quitting over low pay, Mr. LeSchnook's specific demands actually threatened the financial stability of the entire business during his short time working there, creating one of the more serious examples of how badly things could go wrong when the wrong person ended up added to the staff, even briefly. Stanley S. SquarePants, described as SpongeBob's cousin, also worked at the Krusty Krab across a range of different positions, including cashier, fry cook, waiter, and other roles connected to the business. At one point, he even held a manager position, though according to the show, his time in that role ended up causing significant damage to the restaurant rather than helping it run more smoothly. Eventually, Stanley was traded away to work at the Chum Bucket instead, and once he arrived there, he ended up blowing the rival restaurant up as part of a larger plan connected to Mr. Krabs. This example stands out as one of the more dramatic entries on the list of temporary workers, involving a family connection to SpongeBob, a wide range of different jobs held across a short period of time, and an ending that involved actual destruction of the Krusty Krab's biggest competitor. A character referred to simply as Fish Captain worked as a temporary fry cook during the same episode that also involved Pearl's time as a substitute cook. Welcome to the Bikini Bottom Triangle. Beyond this specific role, little else connects him to the wider story of the restaurant, placing him among the shorter and less detailed entries within this long list of temporary employees. A character described as an eternally tortured donut worked as a waiter during an episode called Ghoul Fools, adding one of the stranger and more unusual names to the overall list of characters who have spent time working at the Krusty Krab. Given how many different creatures and characters already populate Bikini Bottom, a character built entirely around the idea of a cursed or tortured donut fits within the wider pattern of the show, introducing odd, one-time characters specifically for a single episode's storyline before moving on and never mentioning them again. Beyond individual characters, certain groups have also briefly worked at the restaurant together, rather than as single employees. A group of teenagers appeared as workers during an episode called Squid on Strike, though according to the show, they were later fired from their positions. This example shows that Mr. Krabs has not limited his hiring decisions strictly to established characters connected to the wider main cast, occasionally bringing in entirely new groups of workers for a specific storyline, before letting them go once that storyline reaches its conclusion. Separate from all of these individual human, or rather fish and sea creature examples, one particularly unusual entry on this list involves King Neptune himself, the ruler overseeing the wider ocean kingdom that Bikini Bottom exists within. At one point, Neptune served briefly as a trainee at the Krusty Krab, an especially strange detail given his position of enormous power and authority within the wider world of the show. Having a character of that much importance step into a low-level restaurant training role, even briefly, adds an unusual and memorable moment to the restaurant's overall employment history, showing that Krabs' willingness to bring in temporary help has occasionally extended even to characters holding far more power and status than anyone else connected to the Krusty Krab. One final detail ties all of these different examples together into a single overall pattern. According to information connected to the wider Krabs business empire, nearly every single one of these temporary employees ended up quitting by the end of whatever episode they appeared in, and none of them ever returned afterward to resume any kind of position within Krabs businesses again. The only real exception to this pattern involves a group referred to as the Lemurian Bots, whose ultimate fate after their appearance was never actually revealed within the show itself. Every other name on this long list, from Jim all the way through Stanley SquarePants, followed the same basic outcome. They showed up, worked for a short stretch of time, and then left the Krusty Krab behind for good, never coming back to work there again in any later episode. This pattern stands in sharp contrast to the two names that have anchored the restaurant since its very first episode. SpongeBob and Squidward have remained in their positions for the entire length of the show, weathering everything from exploding patty vaults to health inspections to competition from across the street, while dozens of other characters have cycled through the same building for a single episode before disappearing entirely. Looking at the full list together, it becomes clear that the Krusty Krab has never actually struggled to find people willing to fill in when needed. What it has struggled with, again and again, is finding anyone willing to stay for the long run, the way its original two employees always have. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of this explains, though, why Mr. Krabs keeps running his business this exact way, relying on such a small permanent staff while constantly cycling through short-term help instead of simply hiring more full-time workers to begin with. Understanding that decision means looking directly at how Krabs actually thinks about money and how that thinking shapes nearly every single choice connected to running the restaurant. Section 7. Pricing and Krabs' Business Philosophy. Every decision made inside the Krusty Krab eventually traces back to one single idea sitting at the center of Mr. Krabs' mind: the constant pursuit of money. Almost nothing about how the restaurant runs, from the prices charged at the counter, to the wages paid, to the two employees standing behind it, happens without that idea shaping the outcome in some way. Understanding the actual business philosophy behind the Krusty Krab means looking past the food and the building entirely and looking directly at the crab who owns it, the way he thinks, and the habits that have shaped nearly every choice he has made since opening his restaurant. The restaurant itself operates under a specific business name within the show, registered officially as Krusty Krab Incorporated, while operating publicly and interacting with customers under the simpler name of the Krusty Krab. This detail shows that, despite Krab's personality often coming across as somewhat simple-minded when it comes to anything besides money, the business itself has been set up with a proper legal structure behind it, giving it the same kind of formal business identity that a real-world company would carry. Underneath that formal structure, though, sits a business built almost entirely around one guiding rule: charge customers as much as reasonably possible, while spending as little as possible on everything connected to actually running the place. This approach shows up most clearly in how the restaurant handles its prices. According to information connected to the wider franchise, a Krabby Patty has been priced in different ways depending on the specific situation. Under a standard listed price, a Krabby Patty costs $2.99, though on Wednesdays specifically, that price drops down to 99 cents, and that discounted version comes bundled together with a side of fries and a shake. Separate from this specific pricing structure, the most commonly referenced price for a single Krabby Patty across the wider show sits at $1. For employees working at the restaurant, though, that same burger costs far less, priced at just 25 cents. This gap between what regular customers pay and what employees pay reveals something important about how Krabs runs his pricing overall. Even his own employee discount stays relatively small, $0.25 rather than something free, showing that even the people directly responsible for making the food do not get it handed to them without paying something for it first. Prices at the Krusty Krab have not always stayed fixed at these lower amounts either. Under different circumstances, the same basic menu item has been shown reaching far higher prices depending on the type of restaurant experience being offered. If the Krusty Krab were being run as a fine dining establishment rather than a normal fast food counter, the price connected to that same food jumps all the way up to $25. This detail shows that Krab's pricing decisions are not built around some fixed, unchanging number attached permanently to the Krabby Patty itself. Instead, the price shifts dramatically depending on the setting, the presentation, and whatever kind of experience Krabs believes he can convince customers to pay more for. A burger costing a single dollar under normal circumstances can turn into a $25 item the moment it gets dressed up and served within a fancier environment, and Krabs has shown throughout the series that he understands this difference extremely well. This same willingness to adjust prices based on circumstances rather than sticking to one fixed number shows up clearly during the opening of the Krusty Krab 2. On the very day after that second restaurant opens, King Neptune arrives to visit, and Krabs' response to this visit involves immediately raising his prices. Rather than treating Neptune as a normal customer, deserving the usual pricing, Krabs sees an opportunity connected to serving someone with that much wealth and status, and he adjusts what he charges accordingly. This single moment captures an important piece of how Krabs actually thinks about running his business. Prices are not treated as something fixed and fair for every customer walking through the door. Instead, they shift based on who is buying, what kind of situation is unfolding, and how much Krabs believes he can reasonably get away with charging at any given moment. Krabs' overall attitude toward money did not appear out of nowhere. According to details connected to his backstory, he grew up during a period resembling the Great Depression, experiencing genuine poverty as a child. He faced bullying and mistreatment from other kids, specifically because of how poor his family was during that stretch of his life. Experiences like these, especially during childhood, tend to shape how people think about financial security for the rest of their lives, and Krabs' case fits that pattern closely. Someone who grew up without much money, facing direct social consequences connected to that lack of money, often carries a heightened awareness of financial security into adulthood, and Krabs' obsession with money throughout the entire series lines up naturally with that kind of early life experience. Beyond his childhood, Krabs also spent time serving in the Navy at one point during his life, earning himself the nickname Armor Abs Krabs during that period of service. Military service of this kind typically demands discipline, structure, and the ability to manage limited resources carefully, all of which connect naturally to the kind of careful, calculated business mindset Krabs would go on to apply toward running the Krusty Krab later in his life. Whatever specific experiences he went through during his time in the Navy, that background adds another layer explaining where his disciplined, resource-conscious approach to running a business might have originally come from, alongside the financial hardship he already experienced earlier during his childhood. Krabs' relationship with money extends well beyond simply pricing his menu items or paying his employees carefully. Across the show, he has been shown engaging in a specific personal ritual involving taking baths directly in piles of his own money, physically surrounding himself with cash as a form of enjoyment rather than simply keeping that money locked away somewhere out of sight. This detail, small as it might seem, reveals something important about how Krabs relates to his wealth. For him, money is not only a tool used to buy things or pay bills, it also functions as a source of genuine personal pleasure, something he wants to physically surround himself with and experience directly rather than simply storing away in a bank or a safe somewhere out of view. This same love of money extends into how Krabs treats his employees on a daily basis. Throughout the series, he has consistently paid both SpongeBob and Squidward very small amounts for their work, keeping labor costs as low as possible while still expecting full effort and dedication from both of them. Despite this pattern of low pay, SpongeBob himself has never seemed particularly bothered by how little he earns, continuing to show up every single day with the same enthusiasm regardless of his actual paycheck. Squidward, on the other hand, has voiced frustration connected to his low pay and general treatment at different points throughout the show, though, as already covered elsewhere, that frustration has never actually led him to leave the job permanently. One especially telling detail about how Krabs handles money connected to his business involves the lost and found system at the Krusty Krab. According to details connected to the restaurant, a lost and found genuinely exists within the building, but Krabs consistently fails to properly inform anyone that it actually exists. Rather than returning lost items to their rightful owners, or even simply making the lost and found publicly known, Krabs has allowed it to grow into an enormous, disorganized horde of forgotten belongings, including items as unusual as lost children, and even long-extinct marine reptiles that somehow ended up trapped inside it over time. At one point, Krabs even took musical instruments belonging to Squidward directly out of his employee's own locker, specifically to add them to this hidden lost and found collection. This detail shows a version of Krabs that goes beyond simple frugality connected to running his restaurant efficiently. hoarding lost items rather than returning them, and even taking things directly from his own employees to add to that hoard, reflects a deeper pattern of holding on to anything of potential value rather than letting it go, regardless of whether that item actually belongs to him in the first place. Krabs' competitive streak connected to money and success shows up outside the restaurant as well, appearing during at least one athletic competition connected to the wider Bikini Bottom community. In one specific event, Krabs won a gold medal during a challenge that involved lifting a dumbbell made out of pickles, showing off a level of physical strength that fits with his identity as a tough, capable crab despite his smaller size compared to some of the other characters in the show. Despite that victory, Krabs ended up losing a separate event during that same overall competition, an onion ring routine, specifically to Plankton. This loss stands out given how consistently Plankton fails against Krabs across nearly every other area of their rivalry throughout the series. Finding one specific event where Plankton actually managed to beat Krabs adds an interesting exception to the usual pattern running through their history together, even if that particular victory had nothing to do with the ongoing fight over the Krabby Patty formula itself. Krabs' handling of advertising and promotion for his restaurant also reflects his careful, cost-conscious approach towards spending money. In one episode called As Seen on TV, Krabs reacts strongly upon seeing that a commercial Squidward had put together for the Krusty Krab looked expensive to produce, despite that expense actually being necessary in order to create a proper advertisement. This reaction shows how deeply uncomfortable Krabs feels anytime money gets spent on something that does not produce an immediate, obvious return. Even when the spending in question serves a clear business purpose, like advertising meant to attract more customers, Krabs still reacts with concern the moment he realizes how much that spending actually cost. Despite this reputation for being tight with money in almost every situation, Krabs is not written as a character who cares about wealth purely for selfish reasons, disconnected from anyone else in his life. He genuinely dotes on his daughter Pearl, showing real affection and care toward her throughout the series, despite his general reputation for greed. He also holds real appreciation for both SpongeBob and Squidward as employees, even though that appreciation rarely translates into higher pay or better working conditions for either one of them. This combination gives Krabs a more layered personality than a simple, one-dimensional obsession with money might suggest on its own. He can come across as deeply selfish in many everyday situations connected to running his business, while still being described as someone who cares thoughtfully about the people closest to him underneath that surface-level focus on profit. Krabs' identity as a business owner also connects back to his self-image as a sailor, a role he has identified with at different points throughout the series, beyond just his specific time serving in the Navy. This connection between his sailor identity and his role as a business owner ties directly back into the design of the restaurant itself, built to resemble a lobster trap and filled with old ship equipment used as furniture. Even his own personal sense of identity, separate from the actual building, leans heavily into this same nautical theme that shapes almost everything else connected to the Krusty Krab. A crab who thinks of himself partly as a sailor, running a restaurant built to look like old fishing equipment, filled with furniture built from actual ship parts, creates a business whose entire identity connects consistently back to the ocean and to a life spent around ships and sailing. Taken together, all of these different details paint a fairly complete picture of the philosophy driving nearly every decision connected to the Krusty Krab. Prices shift based on opportunity, rather than staying fixed and fair. Employee pay stays as low as Krabs can manage, while still keeping his restaurant properly staffed. Advertising spending gets questioned and second-guessed, even when it serves a clear purpose. Lost items get hoarded rather than returned. Personal enjoyment comes wrapped up directly in piles of physical cash. None of these individual details exist in isolation. Together, they build the foundation of a business built almost entirely around the personality of one crab, whose relationship with money, shaped by a childhood spent in poverty and years spent disciplined through military service, has never really loosened, even after building one of the most successful restaurants in all of Bikini Bottom. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of this still leaves one question sitting untouched. Directly across the street sits another restaurant, run by someone trying just as hard to take those same customers away, and it has never once come close to succeeding. Section 8. The rivalry that shapes daily operations. Directly across the street from the Krusty Krab sits a small, bucket-shaped building with 2 brown doors and the words "Chum Bucket" written near the top in red. It has been there for years, run by the same 2 people, selling food that almost nobody in Bikini Bottom actually wants to eat. On paper, this restaurant should be putting real pressure on Krabs and his business every single day. In practice, the Chum Bucket has spent the entire history of the show failing to do exactly that, and looking closely at why reveals just as much about the Krusty Krab's success as it does about its rival's failure. The Chum Bucket first appeared in an episode simply titled Plankton, introducing both the restaurant and its basic purpose within the wider story. It sits in a suburban area of Bikini Bottom, positioned right across the street from the Krusty Krab, making the 2 businesses direct neighbors as well as direct competitors. The restaurant is owned jointly by Sheldon J. Plankton and his computer wife Karen, and the building serves a second purpose beyond simply being a place of business. It also functions as the home where both of them actually live, meaning the line between Plankton's professional life and personal life barely exists at all. Nearly everything connected to his business, his inventions, and his day-to-day living all happens inside the exact same small structure. The single biggest reason the Chum Bucket has never managed to seriously threaten the Krusty Krab comes down to something simple: the food itself. According to Steven Hillenburg, the creator of the show, the Chum Bucket stands out as the only place in all of Bikini Bottom that actually serves meat, a detail that separates it directly from the confirmed vegan nature of the Krabby Patty covered earlier. Rather than working in the restaurant's favor, though, this detail connects directly to why customers avoid the place entirely. The primary food served there is called chum, and chum has been described consistently throughout the show as tasting awful and smelling just as bad. Plankton has tried preparing chum in different forms over the years, hoping that changing its presentation might finally make it appealing to customers, but these attempts have repeatedly failed to fix the underlying problem. No matter how it gets served, chum simply does not taste good, and that single fact has done more to keep the Chum Bucket empty than almost anything else connected to the business. This contrast between the 2 restaurants could not be clearer. The Krusty Krab sells a burger that has become the single most popular food item in the entire town, built from a formula so valuable that an entire rivalry has formed around protecting it. The Chum Bucket sells food built from a product that repels customers almost on sight. Both restaurants sit close enough together that customers could easily walk between them within seconds, yet nearly every single person in Bikini Bottom chooses the same side of the street every single time. This is not a rivalry built around 2 evenly matched restaurants fighting for the same customers. It is a rivalry between one restaurant that succeeded almost by accident, built on a formula born from a childhood friendship gone wrong, and another restaurant that has never managed to fix the most basic problem sitting at the center of its entire business. Despite owning a restaurant that struggles constantly to bring in customers, Plankton has never seemed to face any serious financial collapse that would force the Chum Bucket to close down permanently. Exactly how he manages to keep the doors open, given how rarely anyone actually walks through them to buy food, has never been fully explained within the show itself. This detail adds an odd layer of mystery sitting underneath the entire rivalry. A business that consistently fails to attract customers should eventually run out of money, yet the Chum Bucket has remained standing across from the Krusty Krab for the entire length of the series, continuing to open its doors day after day, despite almost never having anyone to serve. Karen plays a much larger role in actually running the Chum Bucket than a lot of viewers might initially assume. While Plankton is often shown as the one coming up with new plans and schemes connected to the restaurant, specific episodes, including one called Krabby Road and another called Plankton Gets the Boot, make it clear that Karen actually holds more control over the building itself than Plankton does. She has the ability to remove him from the restaurant if she chooses to, giving her a level of authority over the business that goes beyond simply being a co-owner working alongside her husband. Beyond this authority, Karen has also personally taken on a wide range of jobs within the restaurant over the years, working at different points as a busser, a chef, a waitress, and a cashier, depending on whatever the specific situation required. This range of roles shows that Karen's involvement in the Chum Bucket goes far beyond simply running the background lab connected to Plankton's inventions. She has been directly responsible for keeping the actual restaurant portion of the business functioning as well, stepping into nearly every job that needs doing whenever the situation calls for it. The physical building itself reflects the same struggling identity that defines the business inside it. Beyond the dining area where customers, on the rare occasions they exist, actually sit and eat, the Chum Bucket contains a laboratory space that Plankton refers to as his kitchen, blurring the line between food preparation and scientific experimentation in a way that fits his character perfectly. A separate lab room exists within the building as well, connected specifically to Plankton's various inventions and schemes, rather than to the food service side of the business. Further back, Plankton and Karen maintain an actual bedroom where they sleep, described in some episodes as more extravagant than the rest of the building's plain metallic walls might suggest, complete with matching twin beds and framed photographs hanging nearby. This mix of laboratory space, invention room, and personal living quarters, all crammed inside the exact same building that technically operates as a restaurant, shows just how differently the Chum Bucket functions compared to the more strictly business-focused layout of the Krusty Krab. Even when the Chum Bucket has occasionally managed to bring in a wave of new customers, those brief successes have never lasted very long or come from any genuine improvement to the food itself. In one specific episode, a character named Bubble Bass becomes a regular customer at the Chum Bucket, visiting again and again, and appearing to be the only person in town who actually enjoys the chum being served there. This detail briefly suggests that Plankton might have finally found a way to build a loyal customer base, giving his restaurant a rare moment of apparent success. That success turns out to be built on a lie, though. It is later revealed that Bubble Bass never actually liked the chum at all. He had simply been paid by Karen to keep coming back and ordering food, creating the appearance of a satisfied regular customer without any of it being genuine. He disliked the food so intensely that he had actually needed to visit a doctor on 2 separate occasions because of how badly it affected him, yet he kept returning anyway because of the money involved. This example captures something important about nearly every version of Chum Bucket's success shown throughout the series. Whenever the restaurant appears to be doing well, that success tends to come from some kind of trick, deception, or outside manipulation, rather than from the food actually improving or genuinely winning customers over on its own merit. That same episode eventually escalates into real consequences for the restaurant. A health inspector shuts the Chum Bucket down entirely, acting on a lie that SpongeBob had spread, claiming that Plankton uses fish as an ingredient in his chum. This shutdown leaves Plankton and Karen standing outside on the street, watching their restaurant get condemned by the same kind of health inspection process that the Krusty Krab itself has had to face at different points throughout the show. Unlike the Krusty Krab, though, which has managed to pass its own health inspections, despite plenty of chaos surrounding those visits, the Chum Bucket in this particular episode ends up actually closed down as a direct result of its inspection, highlighting once again just how much more fragile Plankton's business has always been compared to Krabs. There have also been rare moments where the Chum Bucket saw a genuine rise in popularity, connected to something other than trickery, though these moments never lasted. In one specific storyline, Patrick changes the slogan connected to the Chum Bucket, and this new slogan actually succeeds in bringing real customers through the door, customers who willingly eat Plankton's food despite how bad it tastes. This unexpected success creates real jealousy on Krab's part, since the Krusty Krab actually starts losing business to its rival for the first time in a very long time. Moments like this stand out specifically because they are so rare within the overall history of the show. The Chum Bucket succeeding, even briefly, through a legitimate change rather than a scheme or a paid customer, happens so infrequently that each instance stands out clearly against the restaurant's usual pattern of failure. That same storyline eventually spirals into an even stranger turn of events. Krabs ends up eating an enormous amount of chum himself, consuming the entire supply that Plankton had on hand, and in the process of doing so, he also ends up eating Plankton directly, which somehow results in Krabs gaining possession of the secret formula through that bizarre sequence of events. Around this same period, Krabs makes a separate decision to turn the Krusty Krab into a restaurant exclusively serving pets rather than regular customers, a choice that forces the rest of Bikini Bottom to head over to the Chum Bucket instead, simply because they have nowhere else to eat. This entire chain of events shows how unstable both restaurants can become whenever either owner starts making unusual decisions, and how quickly the balance between the two businesses can shift, even if that shift never lasts very long before things return back to their normal pattern. Beyond these food and customer-related struggles, the Chum Bucket has also suffered an extraordinary amount of physical destruction across the show's history, arguably even more than the Krusty Krab itself has faced. In one episode called Imitation Krabs, the building actually explodes due to a self-destruction system built directly into it. In two separate episodes, Mr. Krabs manages to trick Plankton into mixing together specific substances, and both times, that mixture causes the Chum Bucket to explode as a direct result. In another episode, Karen becomes infected with a computer virus serious enough that it ends up causing physical damage to the restaurant itself. Beyond these specific examples, the building has been shown exploding or suffering serious damage on numerous other occasions throughout the series as well. At one point, during an episode called The Sinking Feeling, the Chum Bucket even sinks completely, along with a number of other buildings across Bikini Bottom during that same storyline. This pattern of repeated destruction adds another layer to why the Chum Bucket has never managed to build any kind of lasting success. A restaurant that keeps exploding, sinking, or getting shut down by health inspectors faces an uphill climb that goes well beyond simply improving its food. Even during the rare stretches where Plankton manages to attract a few real customers, some kind of disaster tends to follow close behind, undoing whatever small progress had been made and resetting the business right back to its usual failing state. Plankton's approach toward fixing these problems has never really focused on the food itself in any lasting way. Rather than working to genuinely improve the taste or quality of chum, his efforts have consistently focused instead on schemes, inventions, and shortcuts meant to either trick customers into eating his food or force success through some other indirect method entirely. This pattern connects directly back to his ongoing obsession with stealing the Krabby Patty formula, an obsession covered in detail earlier. Rather than treating that formula theft as one option among many possible business strategies, it has essentially become his primary strategy, the one path he keeps returning to again and again, rather than putting real effort into building something that could succeed entirely on its own. Looking at the full picture, the rivalry between these two restaurants has never actually been much of a rivalry at all in the way that word usually gets used. A real rivalry suggests two competitors capable of genuinely threatening each other, each one holding real advantages that could tip the balance in either direction depending on circumstances. What actually exists between the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket looks very different from that. One restaurant sells food built from a formula so good that people line up for it every single day. The other sells food so unpleasant that even paid actors and desperate schemes have struggled to keep customers coming back for more than a short stretch of time. One restaurant has stayed standing, mostly intact, running smoothly under the same two employees for years. The other has exploded, sunk, and been shut down by health inspectors more times than most viewers could probably count. The two buildings sit close enough together that their proximity alone should create constant pressure between them, yet that pressure has never actually translated into anything close to real competition. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A rivalry built on failed schemes and bad chum is one kind of threat facing the business. A different threat altogether comes from anyone with the actual power to shut the whole place down, and that kind of visitor has come knocking more than once. Section 9. What happens when inspectors show up? Running a restaurant means eventually answering to someone outside the building entirely, someone whose job is not to eat the food or work the register, but to check whether the whole operation is actually safe to keep running. The Krusty Krab has faced this kind of outside inspection more than once across the show's history, and the clearest example of exactly what happens during one of these visits comes from a single episode, one that turns a routine health inspection into one of the most chaotic mornings the restaurant has ever experienced. The episode is called Nasty Patty, and it opens on what looks like an ordinary day. Mr. Krabs is taking one of his usual baths in a pile of his own money when he notices something in the air that immediately changes his mood. He recognizes the smell connected to the health inspector's arrival before the inspector even steps through the door. Krab's response is immediate and frantic. He rushes over to SpongeBob and starts shouting instructions, telling him to wash his hands, clean the floors, and change his underwear, all before the inspector actually gets a chance to walk inside and start looking around. Both of them end up peeking out through the kitchen window, watching the inspector stand outside writing notes on a clipboard, and Krabs makes it clear exactly how serious this visit actually is. If the inspector finds even a single health violation during his visit, the entire restaurant could end up closed down for good. Once the inspector actually enters the building, Krabs takes a very specific approach to try to guarantee a passing result. Rather than simply letting the man carry out a normal inspection, Krabs tells SpongeBob to bring him one of everything listed on the menu, hoping that generosity alone might smooth the entire process along before any real problems get discovered. The inspector works his way through this pile of free food, and once he finishes, he places one final order before delivering his official judgment on the restaurant. He asks for a single, ordinary Krabby Patty, explaining that once he finishes that last item, his inspection will be complete. At this exact moment, a television inside the kitchen delivers a news report that changes everything happening inside the restaurant. According to that report, a man has been going around town pretending to be a health inspector, using that fake identity specifically to con restaurants out of free food without ever actually representing any real health department. Krabs, watching this report play out in real time, jumps immediately to a specific conclusion. He becomes convinced that the man currently sitting in his restaurant, the same man who just ate an entire menu's worth of free food, must be this exact imposter rather than a real inspector carrying out a genuine visit. Furious at the idea that he has just been tricked into giving away free food for nothing, Krabs decides to take action rather than simply confronting the man directly. He and SpongeBob head into the kitchen and begin building a Krabby Patty, specifically designed to be as disgusting as possible, giving it the name Nasty Patty as they put it together. The ingredients they choose reflect exactly how far they are willing to go in that moment of anger. They add volcano sauce and seahorse radish, both already unpleasant enough on their own, and combine those with toenail clippings mixed directly into the batch. As if that combination were not already bad enough, SpongeBob drops the finished patty directly into a toilet at one point during the process, and Krabs takes the extra step of drying it off using his own gym socks before finally sending it out to the man waiting at his table. The moment finally arrives where the man is about to take his first bite of this patty, and right before his mouth reaches the food, a fly happens to fly directly into his mouth instead. This sudden interruption causes him to start choking almost immediately. Watching this unfold from the kitchen, Krabs and SpongeBob react with genuine delight, laughing loudly at what they believe is simply a fitting punishment for a man they still think is nothing more than a con artist. Neither of them realizes in that moment that what they are actually watching is a man in real physical distress, choking on something that has nothing to do with the food they made at all. The situation escalates quickly from there. The man ends up dropping the patty entirely, then slips on it as it hits the floor, and the fall sends him crashing headfirst into the edge of the table. That impact knocks him completely unconscious, and the fly that had caused the initial choking eventually makes its way back out of his mouth once he stops moving. From the kitchen, Krabs and SpongeBob peek out through the window one more time to check on the situation, and this time, what they see stops their laughter completely. The man lies motionless on the floor, his eyes crossed and his tongue hanging out in an exaggerated, cartoonish way, surrounded by the scattered ingredients from the ruined patty and a table that has now been knocked over and broken during the fall. Krabs' reaction to this sight shifts immediately from anger into panic. Rather than laughing at what he still assumes is a con artist getting what he deserves, he becomes convinced that the man is actually dead, and that the nasty patty they built together is directly responsible for killing him. SpongeBob, standing beside him, seems to share in this same panic, and the two of them spend a moment simply screaming in horror at what they believe they have just done. In the middle of this panic, another news report plays on the same television that had originally triggered their suspicion in the first place. This second report reveals that the fake health inspector conning restaurants around town has actually already been caught and arrested. Alongside this update, the report shows a photograph of the actual imposter, and that photograph makes something immediately clear. The man pictured on screen looks nothing like the man currently lying unconscious on the floor of the Krusty Krab. This single detail changes everything about the situation Krabs and SpongeBob now find themselves in. The man they tricked, mocked, and ultimately believed they killed was never the imposter at all. He was the real health inspector the entire time, carrying out a completely legitimate visit before Krabs' decision to serve him. The nasty patty derailed the entire process. Realizing this mistake sends both of them into an even deeper panic than before. Rather than facing the situation directly or attempting to get the man real medical help, Krabs makes a decision that pushes the entire episode into much darker territory. He decides that the safest option is to remove the body from the restaurant entirely and bury it somewhere else, specifically so that nobody will ever discover what actually happened inside the Krusty Krab that day. Following through on this plan, Krabs and SpongeBob carry the health inspector's body out of the restaurant and up to the top of a nearby hill, where they begin digging a hole to bury him. During this process, SpongeBob digs up a large rock buried in the ground, and at the exact moment he pulls that rock free, the health inspector begins to regain consciousness after his fall. Before he can fully wake up or understand what is happening around him, the large rock SpongeBob just dug up ends up hitting him directly in the head, knocking him unconscious once again, right in the middle of what was supposed to be his own burial. Right as this second accident occurs, a police car happens to pull up nearby, carrying 2 officers. Rather than immediately noticing anything suspicious about 2 people burying an unconscious body on top of a hill, the officers instead offer Krabs and SpongeBob a ride back to the Krusty Krab, treating the entire interaction as a completely normal, unremarkable encounter. Krabs and SpongeBob accept this offer, and the group heads back toward their vehicle. As it starts raining during this stretch of the episode, the health inspector's body slides down through the mud, and SpongeBob happens to notice this movement. Rather than raising any alarm about a body moving around on its own, the group simply loads him into the trunk of the police car before everyone climbs inside and drives away together. Back near the restaurant, the story takes another sharp turn. One of the officers, apparently trying to lighten the mood or make a joke about the bizarre situation, suggests that if the health inspector really had been killed and buried the way Krabs and SpongeBob believed, then his sudden reappearance might make him a zombie who somehow managed to walk himself out of his own grave. Almost immediately after this joke gets made, the health inspector actually does show up again, still disoriented from everything that has happened to him throughout the episode. Rather than recognizing him as simply confused and injured, the officers panic and assume the joke they had just made a moment earlier must actually be true. Believing they are now facing an actual zombie, both officers attack the health inspector violently, only stopping once they finally realize he is not a zombie at all, just a very unlucky man who has been through an extraordinarily rough day. Once everyone finally settles down and the confusion clears up, the health inspector delivers the news that the entire episode had been building toward from the very beginning. Despite everything that happened to him, including the fly, the fall, the second head injury from the rock, and being physically attacked by 2 confused police officers, he informs Krabs and SpongeBob that the Krusty Krab has officially passed its health inspection. Given the specific wording used earlier in the episode, where SpongeBob had told the inspector that receiving one final Krabby Patty would complete his inspection, some ambiguity exists around whether completing the inspection technically guaranteed a passing result, though the outcome delivered by the inspector himself confirms that the restaurant did in fact pass. Following this announcement, the group decides to celebrate by eating Krabby Patties together, with Krabs offering discounted burgers to the health inspector and the 2 police officers as a way of marking the occasion. As the health inspector attempts to walk back through the door on his way out, a final piece of misfortune catches up with him one more time, as the door slams directly into his head on his way through it. Taken as a whole, this single episode captures something important about how the Krusty Krab actually handles outside scrutiny when it arrives unannounced. Rather than confidently welcoming a health inspection as a routine part of running a legitimate business, Krabs' response reveals genuine anxiety about what an inspector might find, anxiety serious enough that he immediately jumps to conclusions about the man's identity rather than simply proceeding through a normal visit. That anxiety, combined with a specific news report arriving at exactly the wrong moment, transforms a standard health inspection into a chain of events involving a deliberately disgusting burger, a choking incident, a false assumption of death, an attempted burial, a second injury, a mistaken zombie attack, and a final joyful celebration once everything somehow gets sorted out in the end. Despite every single one of these disasters happening one after another, the restaurant still manages to pass its inspection by the time the episode reaches its conclusion, showing that whatever chaos happens behind the scenes, the actual food and conditions inside the Krusty Krab kitchen apparently meet whatever standard the health department requires, even during one of the most disastrous mornings the restaurant has ever experienced. This same pattern of surviving chaos without any lasting consequence connects directly back to something already established about the building itself. The Krusty Krab has weathered vehicle crashes, garbage floods, fry basket explosions, and now, at least according to this one specific episode, an entire sequence involving a health inspector nearly dying on the property. Through all of it, the restaurant keeps its doors open, keeps its employees in place, and keeps selling the same burger that started the whole business in the first place. Whatever disasters happen along the way, they never seem to actually threaten the Krusty Krab's basic ability to keep functioning as a restaurant once the dust finally settles. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of this, though, shows what happens when Krabs actually decides to grow his business on purpose, rather than simply defending what he already has. A health inspection reveals how the restaurant handles outside pressure it never asked for. A second location, built entirely by choice, reveals something very different about how far Krabs is willing to go once he decides there is more money sitting just within reach. Section 10, The Krusty Krab 2, and what it reveals about the business. For years, the Krusty Krab existed as a single building sitting on its own, the only version of itself anywhere in Bikini Bottom. That changed with the release of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, which introduced a second location built directly beside the original. This new restaurant carried the name Krusty Krab 2, and its arrival gave Mr. Krabs the first real chance in the entire show to expand his business beyond the single building that had defined it since the very beginning. Krabs built this second restaurant directly to the right of the original Krusty Krab, placing both locations close enough together that customers could walk between them within seconds. The new restaurant officially opened on March 7th, when a reporter named Perch Perkins asked Krabs what had actually inspired him to build a second location. Krabs answered with a single word that summed up his entire motivation without any need for further explanation. He said money, no mention of wanting to serve more customers, improve the neighborhood, or create new jobs. Just a simple, direct answer, connecting back to the same driving force that has shaped nearly every decision he has ever made connected to his business. The opening of the Krusty Krab 2 also brought its own management decision, one that created real tension between the restaurant's two long-standing employees. On the same day the new location opened, Krabs announced who would take over as manager. SpongeBob, having worked as fry cook since the very first episode of the series, expected that this promotion would go to him. Instead, Krabs gave the position to Squidward, explaining his choice by describing him as more mature compared to SpongeBob. This decision left SpongeBob visibly disappointed, watching a role he believed he deserved go to his coworker instead. Squidward accepted the job and wore a small pin identifying his new title, stepping into a position of real authority for what would turn out to be a fairly short stretch of time. The very next day, King Neptune arrived at the new restaurant, and Krabs' response to this visit revealed something already established about how he handles pricing. Rather than treating Neptune like a regular customer, Krabs raised his prices specifically because of who had just walked through the door. He assumed Neptune had come simply to order food, but the actual reason for his visit turned out to be something far more serious. His crown had been stolen the night before, and Plankton was responsible for taking it, using it as part of a larger plan that would end up framing Krabs for the theft entirely. What followed became one of the central storylines of the entire movie, sending SpongeBob and Patrick on a journey to a place called Shell City to recover the missing crown before Krabs could be punished for a crime he never actually committed. Along the way, they received help from television personality David Hasselhoff, who assisted them in making their way back to Bikini Bottom once the crown had finally been found. Meanwhile, Plankton took his scheme even further by placing a mind-controlling helmet on King Neptune adding him to a growing list of citizens across town who had already fallen under the same kind of control. SpongeBob eventually found a way to free everyone from Plankton's control by performing a song called Goofy Goober Rock, breaking the hold the helmets had placed over the town. With Plankton finally arrested and the crisis resolved, Neptune released Krabs from the helmet that had been controlling him as well. Once everything settled, Krabs made a new decision about who should manage the Krusty Krab 2. He gave the position to SpongeBob, reversing his earlier choice and finally handing him the promotion he had wanted from the very beginning of the movie. Beyond the events of the film itself, the Krusty Krab 2 has continued showing up across other parts of the wider franchise as well, appearing in the movie's video game adaptation, in book adaptations connected to the film, and in later video games, including Nicktoons Challenge and SpongeBob Simulator. In most of these appearances, the second restaurant looks almost identical to the original, distinguished mainly by the number 2 displayed somewhere on its exterior, often shown on a banner reading Grand Opening during its debut. Looking at the Krusty Krab 2 as a whole, its existence says something important about how far Krabs was actually willing to go once real opportunity presented itself. For years, one restaurant had been enough to keep him satisfied, protecting his single formula and running his business with the same 2 employees the entire time. The moment a clear chance to expand appeared, though, he took it without hesitation, building an entirely new location purely because he saw more money sitting within reach. Even the management decision behind who would run it followed his usual pattern of shifting loyalty and priorities however the situation demanded. First choosing the safer option in Squidward, then reversing course entirely once SpongeBob had proven himself capable of handling something far bigger than flipping burgers. From an accidental recipe born out of a broken childhood friendship to a second full restaurant standing beside the first one, the entire history behind the Krusty Krab traces back to the same handful of forces running underneath every single decision connected to it. A crab who never stopped thinking about money, a fry cook who never stopped loving his job, a formula that never stopped needing protection, and a business that, despite every explosion, every health scare, and every failed scheme aimed against it, has never once actually stopped serving burgers to the entire town surrounding it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.